So, welcome everybody. My name is Edicio de la Cruz, along with Beto, Cata, and Sebastiana. We work at Kira. Kira, we help fintech companies and enterprise companies launch stablecoin products and AI products. One of the examples that we're most proud of is working with a company called OXXO. If you've ever been to Latin America, OXXO is a convenience store. They have 21,000 points of sale. And this is they're launching a remittance product with us. It's the first time in brick and mortar. Okay, sorry. Is this better? Okay. You're right, Sean. So one of the case studies that we're the most proud of is working with OXXO, which we just launched. OXXO is a brick and mortar retailer. They launched a remittance product with us. So thanks to our partnership with OXXO, 25 million people in Mexico can now request funds through the OXXO app using stablecoins without ever knowing they're using stablecoins. It's 45% cheaper than traditional remittances. And this goes with our ethos that the blockchain is the ultimate equalizer when it comes to democratization of financial services for the underbanked, which is kind of our bread and butter. But without further ado, I want to open up the stage to somebody who I've known briefly, but I feel like I've known a long time because I've studied your journey so much. A big round of applause for Sean for making it out today.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
So Sean started a small company called Circle, which IPO in June for $35 billion. But we're not here to kiss your ass, Sean. We're here to deliver the goods. We're going to do a kind of off-the-record story, right? It doesn't need to be that romantic.
As soon as you said off the record, the lights went down.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, cute. Yeah, I want to talk about the early days of Circle. So I think when we think of Circle, we think of this. First of all, we think of every entrepreneur's dream, right? Who's the founder here, right? Like not only the financial success, but also the impact. They literally built a new way of moving money, and I think that is the wet dream of every single fintech founder here. Talk about building like a new rail of money that's applicable for the masses, right? So that to me is the ultimate goal, the peak of the peak. But let's go back to the beginning. Let's go back to like 2013. Talk to me about the who, the what inspired the first iteration of what Circle was back then.
Yeah, it's funny to hear think about 2013. So it's like 12 years ago, which feels like 100 years in crypto. But in 2013, so my co-founder Jeremy and I had done a couple other companies together already. My background's in engineering, and Jer is like a born evangelist. He could sell anybody on anything, you know. And we weren't really sure we were going to start another company, but we were very obsessed with this idea of kind of democratizing global finance. And we had been involved in building a bunch of web standards. I'd written a bunch of languages and built server products in the early days of the web. We were basically kids, and we wanted to do the same thing for money. And so the idea was to put money on internet rails and break down all the silos and the gates in the way of distributing money to people all around the world, and just have it work more like every other kind of data on the internet works. And so we came at it from a couple of different angles, but obviously in the early days it was all about Bitcoin. And so when we started Circle in 2013, the first experiments were having money run on the internet was with Bitcoin. And so we were pretty close at the time to what was the Bitcoin core team. Gavin Andrewson had taken over for Satoshi. They happened to live pretty close to us. And so we were in touch with that team, and we had a thesis around what would ultimately happen. We thought it might take 20 years, but what would ultimately happen to the economy. But we were pretty flexible on how it got realized, particularly in the early going. So typical founder advice is usually something like, come up with your ICP, find their pain point, solve that one pain point, and then kind of go from there. And we've never taken that advice. It's probably good advice, but we've always had more than one ICP. and always talked about more than one kind of customer from the outset. And the reason is it's kind of platform thinking, that if you know you ultimately want to create, you're not just optimizing for your first $1 million ARR, but you want to create a generational company and like change the world, which is a crazy thing to think that you can do that. But if you think in those terms, then it's multiple customers that ultimately form a platform. And so we initially, like from the very beginning, we started with multiple products under the umbrella of we are going to create a new kind of financial system that will ultimately have to be encoded in law, which takes a long time. And but stayed pretty flexible and fluid about what the early product experiments ought to be, and treated them as experiments at the time. Yeah, I'd say that one other thing is it's obviously a highly regulated industry, so all the things that we had done in the past, not really heavily regulated at all. Like, so not healthcare, not aviation, or let alone finance. But we were aware of that, and so we invested really early on in trying to address, but really trying to educate regulators, but also bring in people who had more of that background. I think if we had come from that background, we probably would have just thought it would be impossible to do what we were trying to do. So we were sort of helpfully naive about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so those were the early days. Started the company in Ireland for a lot of reasons. We can talk about it if it's interesting. But a lot of the core team at the time was based in Boston. And so Jared and I were based in Boston. And set up a company. I think it was September 2013 when we opened the doors with 4 people, 2 people who used to work with, engineering from it. I was at Adobe, the principal scientist at Adobe. So we pulled over a couple people from Adobe, and that were off and running.
And I recall 2014, it was predominantly, I remember using Circle. It was a
Circle Pay.
Circle Pay, I remember. It was P2P mostly, right? The B2C interface, would you say, was it competing with the Venmo likes? Or like how
Yeah,
would you
it's great
describe
that
it?
you use that, man. I didn't know that.
I'm an OG, man.
Yeah. Do you still have any, do you have balance? We used to give away Bitcoin back in those days.
yeah.
We would go do like things like, always wanted something to kind of be intimate like this, where you could talk to people. And then we would just give away Bitcoin. I mean, we probably gave away, I don't know, like 1,000 Bitcoin or something like that. I don't know how much, but it was a lot. So I was wondering if you were you ever at an event like that?
That's part of that lucky few.
Okay. I mean, Jared in particular, because he was always, like really selling people on the concept. Anyway, yeah, so we had this app called Circle Pay, that's right. But it was one of several different product initiatives we had. So in order to make it work, it was a really simple idea. You could treat it like a global Venmo, so you could use it P2P style. Most people used it to buy Bitcoin though. At the time, that's what they were doing, and then sort of looking at things like Ethereum. But it was like a way to connect your debit card or your credit card and get Bitcoin, which was very difficult to do at the time.
Yeah.
And so you could use P2P payments. You had dollar balance in this app, but in order to manage the sort of ACH and credit card rails into Bitcoin, we needed to create a treasury function, and so we needed to have an OTC desk in order to manage liquidity for Bitcoin. And so that was also a product. It was not facing consumers, it was facing other OTC desks at the time. And yeah, for years, up until, I don't know, it's hard to remember exactly the years. Company's been like 4 different companies, at least, but for a while we were absolutely the number 1 OTC trading desk in the world. But it was created first to provide liquidity to other products.
So OTC Dex came out almost, not accidentally, but definitely not by design, to serve the...
We didn't know it was going to be we weren't going to necessarily serve it as an end product.
Mm-hmm.
It was going to be, part of the iceberg below the surface.
Yeah.
But then there was heavy demand for it, and we had developed a reputation. We had invested in developing a reputation of going at the front door with the regulators, and so we had a trusted brand that was developing. And at the time, you think of 2013, 2014, you had to be really careful who you were trading with, because if you sent a coin, it wasn't a sure thing that you were going to get the money. And so we were one of the very few trusted counterparties you could trade with, and you could send the coin in and you get the money from Circle. And so although it was really meant to manage liquidity internally for our other products, that Circle Pay was one of them, it turned into a product of its own. We eventually sold that business to Kraken. So as things developed, we always saw, well, we're not going to be a trading company. we want to create products that change the world, and also the margins on trading businesses are pretty thin, and and we didn't want to compete with the Jumps and the Combis and the people who we suspected would be the winners in that space. But for a long time we did.
Okay. And then as you kept evolving, so Circle Pay kind of, when was that sunset?
I don't remember the exact year, but I'll tell you what happened to it. So in 2013, there was one bank in the world that would bank a crypto company, and it was Silicon Valley Bank. It was the one bank that would bank any of us. And so I was actually doing a panel, an SVB panel, when Mt. Gox, if you remember Gox, Mt. Gox came apart while I was in the middle of a banking panel on the only bank that would actually bank us at all. And the bankers just like walked out of the room basically because of what was happening. But so SVB banked Coinbase and us, and then Winsys had a company, I'm blanking on now. What's it called?
Zappo.
Yeah, Zappo, exactly, thank you. So I think those were the three, I may be wrong, but I think those were the only three crypto companies that could even get a banking partner at all in the US. And then what happens when you have a product that's predominantly used to put a reversible payment method in, like credit cards, and get an irreversible payment method out? Well, you have a lot of fraud. And then when you have like one banking partner, you're a regulator. Even though we were getting money transmission licenses in the States, your de facto regulator is really your bank partner, because we're not a bank, so we can't handle fiat flows. And so there was sort of this risk issue related to banking and the fraud that was happening at the time. And so we sort of pushed the Bitcoin usage of Circle Pay into the background. And that was kind of when we realized we needed not Bitcoin, and we were also talking to people like Vitalik, and Ethereum was emerging. But what we really needed was dollars, or fiat money, but starting with dollars on blockchains instead of things like Bitcoin, in order to make something like Circle Pay work. And so we started to divert attention away from trying to make Bitcoin work as a payment instrument around that time. Yeah, but it was coupled with a whole bunch of things happening all at once. It was one of like dozens of crypto down periods where you have to be really resilient, and a lot of fraud happening, banks getting nervous. There wasn't no other bank that was viable. These were really early days.
Yeah, you were at it like alone, basically. Relative to today.
Yeah, I mean, Coinbase was in the picture. They had a very different business because they were running an exchange, but it's facing some of the similar issues. But I think there was nobody else other than probably in the U.S. other than the two of us. Yeah.
And so, speaking of an exchange, then after Circle Pay, you start shifting more towards kind of an exchange model.
Well, it started. So it was the thought around let's put dollars on the internet, let's put dollars on blockchains. Came into the picture around them, but the idea is we were going to do it for multiple products. Circle Pay was one. We also started another product called Circle Invest, which was a way for people to acquire multiple tokens and kind of have a bank account that was denominated in crypto. And we ended up selling that to Voyager, if you remember them. So the idea was let's put dollars. Let's create a denomination of a narrow bank stablecoin on blockchains. And the narrow banking idea was similar to starting the company in the first place, which is this. It was basically this idea that comes out of the Chicago Plan economics, which is let's separate lending from payments and money supply. And the way that most banks work, as everybody here probably already knows, is like when you put your money in the bank and you go back later, your money's not really in the bank anymore. It's like it's been lent out like 10 times. And so what you have is like you have a claim on debt when you have money in a demand deposit account. And so narrow banking is the idea of like, what if you didn't have a claim on somebody else's debt, but you actually just had the money that you put in? And that's basically what stablecoins are. But you can't create a narrow bank in the United States. There have been people who tried. There was an effort in 2019 to create something called the narrow bank, and it got shot down because obviously that's not how retail banks work. They work on fractional reserve lending, and our idea was let's get rid of fractional reserve lending. And what if people could just deposit money and they get direct exposure to like the underlying U.S. Treasuries, which is the same idea as a narrow bank. And so we started tinkering with that idea and how to make it work. I'd say 2016, 2017, and we had 2017 was like the ICO boom and everything. So we had the first take of it, there's still other things going on in the company, but the first take of it was we were going to launch a token. It was called the Cent. This is ancient history, but it was called the Cent, and it was going to be launched through Center. And so we had like a Cayman's entity that we were putting together, and it was a governance token, and we were going to put together a consortium that was kind of like a programmable central bank for multiple issuers of stablecoins. That was like the V1. And I'd say there was not a lot of support for it internally or at the board. This is why I wrote the white paper and all the early code, because there's no support to actually hire additional people. But that wasn't the right way to do it, honestly, either. And so we were still iterating on the idea, and ultimately V2, which we can get into, that was the one that we ended up launching. So this was going on at the same time, but yeah.
Wow. So you were kind of incubating all of these products. Some of them would work, some of them not, and you're still like divesting some.
Yeah, I mean, we were doing well because at that time, so 2017, 2018, 2016, 2017, 2018, we were still doing well because of the OTC dust codes here primarily. Yeah. So that was the one that was generating real revenue at that time. The hard thing about having multiple products is if the product is if it just sucks, or if it's just a failure, well then you pull the plug and you dedicate the resources elsewhere. The hard thing is when it's not an outright failure.
Yeah.
And you're kind of in the middle, and you're like, do I just spend more time and money and energy on this, find the right market, or I'm almost at PM Fit. You can kind of like maybe you are close to PM Fit, but maybe you're not. And those are the hard ones. And so I would say honestly, Circle Pay wasn't a failure, but it wasn't a success either. It was kind of in that mid zone for a while. I still think if we had put USDC into it, I think it would have been a big success. But by the time we had USDC and when we launched it, it was much more of a platform play, and so we never went back and did it. I mean, in a way, Cash App kind of did it. I mean, you're not really holding stables. It's like the opposite of the stablecoin sandwich is what they did. But so anyway, that's how I think about that product. And Circle Invest, I think, was launched with terrible timing. So it was probably good. It was a good product. It was good to move on that product on the Voyager.
I think you raised a good point, because I think a lot of us here kind of can relate to that. Like, we launch multiple products, and I say every startup is not really a business. It's a lab. You're launching experiments. We don't know what's going to work, what's going to stick.
Yeah, even if the revisionist history is you knew exactly what it was, which I've heard the revisionist version of Circle, and I'm like, dude, that is not what happened. I've heard versions where, like, I'm not going to name names or anything, but I was like, in a blizzard in 2013 when we were inventing USDC, I was like, dude, we didn't invent USDC for like 4 years later. So anyway, but yeah, it's like, I think there's always a lot more of that. And I also think we were unlucky with some timing that was out of our control. We were lucky with some timing that we took credit for, but it was also kind of just, we were resilient enough to be there when the luck turned, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that goes into every successful startup, I think.
Better to be lucky than good, as they say. So 2018 comes, you guys raise a massive round. I think it's like 400 million, if I'm not mistaken.
That was the E.
Yes, the E.
Yeah.
And you guys acquired a company?
Yeah, so by that point we had launched USDC. So we were actually going to go to market with USDC. So the V2 was scrap the ICO idea and the governance token, at least for now, but don't give up on the consortium, because we didn't want to create like Circle Coin. We did want it to be multiple issuers. It was always the idea. Multiple chains. This is why we didn't create an L1 back then, is because it should be platform neutral, should work on all the chains. We did think a payment chain would emerge before now, which is like, now you look at Arc or Tempo and you're like, I mean, I can justify both of them because we still don't have a real payment chain and we need one. But at the time we thought surely they would emerge, and we don't want to be in that game. We'll operate a level higher than that. We'll be platform neutral. So the idea was multiple issuers, multiple chains. There was a different major distributor that we were working with. It was not Coinbase. There were others also in the picture, but that big distributor kind of backed out at the last minute, and then managed to cut the deal with Coinbase to be the distributor. And Balaji at the time was CTO. Coinbase really leaned in And so we had already launched it with them by that point, but it wasn't a success yet. I mean, Balaji and I thought that it would probably take, because there's no business model behind it, right? Because interest rates were like nothing. So we thought it might take 10 years for the interest rates to get to a point where it was credible and the US government actually recognized it and then coded it into law. It took 7 years to get Genius Act. So in a way you could say we're early, but we thought it would take a while. It definitely didn't happen by 2018. I'd say it started to turn in 2020. That's when we got meaningful liquidity and cleared that liquidity chasm, and then it really started to take off. So 2018 was not there yet. And so we still viewed it as a fundamental building block to what we were going to do, but it was not the success that it has since become. And so this is when there was an acquisition. There were a few acquisitions along the way, but there was a big one in the E, which was Polonia.
And at that time, Coinbase already had significant distribution. How key was that deal for kind of the mass adoption of USDC?
Yeah, I mean, I think I give Coinbase credit. I mean, it's interesting because I've done work on a lot of standards orgs, and I don't recommend it for anybody, but I do think standards are, like open standards are important. And I really wanted stablecoin interoperability to be an open standard. And so it wasn't like owned by a particular company. It was just like, if you want to go make a stable and I want to accept it for payment, we should just rely on like internet standards to make that work. Shouldn't have to go like all join the same platform. That was the idea, like have it be like internet money. Like if you want to set up a website, you don't have to go ask anybody's permission. You just go do that. If you want to sell something, SSL is a standard. That's how it works in browsers. And so we kind of wanted the same concept for money. And so stablecoins needed to be interoperable, and it's helpful when you're trying to build a standard to build it with not a huge consortium. Like Libra was like 28 companies or whatever it was. And the problem with getting a giant group of people together is you can't agree on anything and like to actually get something done. But it is important to get a small group of people together who are kind of like-minded, and it's even more important to have at least some of them be competitors. And so Coinbase wasn't an outright competitor at that point, but they were competitive. And the idea was that if we could both agree on the stablecoin basics, then we can compete at other levels of the stack potentially. And the other levels of the stack would be way more valuable, just like internet standards. Like SMTP is just email standards. Well, email on the internet is way more valuable than if we just had America Online Mail. Yeah. And so that was the whole idea. And so you try to find people who are like-minded who also believe that's the case, but they don't necessarily agree on everything with you. And so there's some urgency around getting to the competitive state so you can get something done. So this is like the calculus of figuring out who's the right partner. And we also had no distribution. I have a lot of weeds, but we being Circle, we had no distribution at the time. And so we needed to work with somebody who had it. So you look at the companies that might have been like-minded, Square, maybe if you can convince Stripe. At the time they had zero interest in anything like this. It's nice to see the table, things have changed. But if you have meaningful distribution channels in crypto, Coinbase was an obvious one for us. They're still like a fourth the size of like Binance or something, but they have similar, sort of regulatory framework at the time and all that. And so they were probably an obvious one. And they had the ability to get distribution. The hard thing about stablecoins, especially now that we have the regulatory piece, it's not totally sorted, but there's at least a playbook for it with Genius Act. The hard thing to clear is the liquidity chasm. And so, like, how do you clear get meaningful liquidity? It takes somebody who can give you distribution. And so like right now, stablecoin use case up to now has mostly been dominated by crypto capital markets. So who are those who can give you distribution in crypto capital markets? Well, at the time it was only CeFi, and there's only like 4 or 5 exchanges that really matter in CeFi. And Coinbase is not the top one, but it's up there. So they're a pretty natural partner. I mean, we ended up getting liquidity though for USDC primarily through DeFi, which wasn't really a thing so much at that time. But there was an opportunity to inject liquidity, and Coinbase did that at a time when they just, injected I don't remember exactly the number, but it's like $2 or $3 million they put in like Compound, or and all of a sudden the USDC was liquid in the protocol, and then you start going. I think now with crypto capital markets, it's really difficult to clear that chasm. This is why I feel like there are two that have liquidity right now in crypto capital markets. the next stablecoin, or at least the next dollar stablecoin that gets meaningful liquidity, probably gets it in a different use case, not crypto capital markets. Maybe something like payments. Somebody who has meaningful distribution in those kinds of channels. It's just my opinion. I think there are going to be 1,000 stablecoins, but only a handful that matter because it's so difficult to clear the liquidity chasm.
Indeed. So after this Coinbase deal happens, then 2020 comes. How's the adoption at the beginning?
Yeah, so I'd say in terms of the ups and downs in a company, 2020 is probably the darkest year. Because USDC had not yet taken off. Toward the end of 2019, toward the beginning of 2020, it was pretty dark times, and so we scaled way down. I think we went from, this is all off the record, so like you won't hold me to the numbers anyway, but. And so, it's hard when you're doing, like Jared and I would do all hands, and you do an all hands, and one of them's a riff, and it's a reduction in force, and you're handling these layoffs. It sucks, and the last thing you want to do is have to do it again. Like if you don't get it right, and then you have to go back 3 months later and do it again, like you really messed up. And so, these are things that founders go through anyway, but we still had belief in, like, the vision, even though we changed course of how to achieve it a few times, the vision actually never changed. It still really is the same vision that we cooked up at, around his kitchen table back in the spring of 2013. But at that time it was pretty dark. We sold we sold the OTC desk to Kraken. We sold Polo to a team that was mostly run by Justin Sun. We sold Circle Invest to Voyager. To sort of divested of a lot of things to really buckle down on USDC, but USDC was not yet a big success. And so it was a bet that now we need to really focus, and this is the thing we'll focus on. But we're down to 50 people. So it was pretty rough.
What goes through, so at that time you had raised like 600 million by that time, in 2020?
Yeah, I don't like to think about that number.
Yeah, it's gotta be dude, it's gotta be the weight of the world on your shoulders. How did it feel at that point in time?
Yeah, the thing is we had good investors. We were in a fortunate position because we had IPO companies in the past, and we'd been successful, and so we had good relationships with people, especially in the early stages, like the A, the B, even actually for the C for us. People are betting on you, and so you feel accountable to the people who decide they're going to commit this window of time of their careers to work, they're trusting you to run the company well. So the people you're working with, but also your investors, and so there's a heavy sense of accountability. But what happens is, and this is why I always advise teams to, definitely don't raise more money than you need at a given time, because you get out ahead of your skis and you're in this weird position where you're overvalued with a weird waterfall model that you can't manage. And so it becomes this odd position where even if you wanted to have what other people might consider a successful outcome, you can't.
No, you're stuck, handcuffed.
Yeah, so there was a little bit of that, but it was also we just wanted to last long enough to get to the next stage because we knew it was going to turn. We never lost conviction around it, but it was definitely a tough time. The toughest times were always the people things that happen. So, yeah.
So, out of that,
that's my favorite year.
So, it's always darkest before dawn, they say. So, what happens directly after? What was kind of the turning point? When did that come?
Yeah, I think that for the product side, it was when we began to see real traction with USDC usage. It's starting with DeFi, and then it grew from there into some CeFi markets as well. Crypto started to turn again, which it does. Now it's turned in the wrong direction again lately, but lots of times those downturns are healthy for the overall health. And so things started to turn in multiple ways. And then we started to develop new ways to inject programmable money, like programmable dollars, into more interesting use cases with partners that weren't necessarily attracted to, say, trading on a central exchange, but we're experimenting with institutional flows and, other usages of dollars on blockchains. And we continue to invest in the regulatory side. So there was this belief that ultimately this way of doing like creating a narrow bank in code on blockchains will be something the US government will put in law. And so we were still investing in that and starting to feel like maybe the tide was beginning to turn there. So, so it was a combination of things. But ultimately the business model was super simple for stablecoin. It's if the market cap grows, well, it's a net interest income business. And so the interest rates it's not exactly linear to interest rates, but if the interest rates are within a particular window that encourages growth, if interest rates get really high, people tend to take their money out of dollar stables because they want to put it to work elsewhere. Even if it's really low, you don't make any money. So there's like a window there where it's not totally linear, but if interest rates are healthy and market cap's growing, well, then the business is healthy. Especially at that point where we had narrowed down the focus just on the USDC.
Interesting. So I think so. So the obviously the ZIRP environment was not favorable, but the environment, interest rate environment, the past few years has been quite favorable.
It was favorable at a time when we needed to be to clear that liquidity chasm, And then the other thing that happened was, despite best intentions, we never brought on another issuer, and there were a lot of reasons for that. There were people, the sort of regulatory environment wasn't conducive to it. So the thing about regulators ultimately is they really like to know, what is the neck to choke if things go wrong? And if you have multiple issuers of USDC, so Coinbase never actually became an issuer. They had the ability to, or the rights to at a certain point. They were always more of a distributor. The idea was they should be able to mint, just like Circle, but so should others. They should be able to come in and mint, and then we'll be governed by this sort of consortium that doesn't necessarily need to be a commercial entity. That was the kind of concept, but that didn't happen, and so all the NII accrued to basically Circle and Coinbase. So as the market cap did begin to grow, it was obviously healthy for Circle bottom line, and then we could start to invest in new initiatives again and bring more people on to work partnerships and get back to reasonable growth mode.
So after that, you guys go into like hyperscale mode. Company really gets into another gear the next few years. When do you guys start thinking about kind of like a major liquidity event? When does that become kind of like? When do you go from like, oh shit, this is tanking, to, oh wow, we can reach the stratosphere?
I mean, I think we thought that from the very beginning, honestly, that it was going to be helpful for USDC specifically to be in the public markets, because we tried to be extremely transparent. It was difficult to get it fully audited in the timeline, but we could get attestations from auditors and then get it fully audited. And then what's the next step? Well, we try to be as transparent as you possibly can be, and when you're a public company, you're forced to be extremely transparent. And so that was always the intent, was thinking that would be the good move for USDC. But honestly, you go back and if you take money from venture investors, well, they're not looking for a profitable business. They're looking for an exit to get, the 6 to 8x, whatever, in a particular time period. I mean, they're 10-year funds, and so it's like a particular business model, and we were venture-backed. I mean, General Catalyst was first money in, and brought here in Excel, and then others followed, and so your end game is either you get acquired by a company and get to that scale, or you become that company, which requires, for the most part, entering public markets. There's some exceptions, obviously, but for the most part, that's the trajectory. But it certainly in 2020 didn't look like there was a clear line of sight to getting there.
And once you do the IPO, like once you go through that process, like how does that feel? Like does it feel like holding up the Vince Lombardi trophy like in football? Like feel like.
I mean, it's funny because it's really not a finish line.
Yeah.
It's a different kind of starting line. Like being on the board of a public company is like not a trivial thing, and so it is. It's a race to start the next race, and it was gratifying that day. I would say there's so much build up to what we were trying to do, and try to do it in a certain way, and. We had taken companies public before, and this is a different scale than what we've done in the past. And so I'd say that particular day was gratifying. So if you ask me about that day, I would say it was surreal. It was this flip of what I just said a minute ago about talking to people about things like riffs.
Yeah.
because we brought in some of the, I would say, OG Circle people to participate in the day, both in the offer but also to be part of the ceremonies. And people just had tears in their eyes, and it's like this changed my life, that kind of thing. So that's amazing that day. But in terms of the trajectory of the company, it's like a really major milestone that then you got to keep building on top of. And so now it's not like the pressure is off. If anything, it's it's even more.
Yeah, so it's sort of like, again, when you win a championship, the pressure next year to win another championship.
Yeah. I mean, we want this to be $1 trillion company, and you want to change the world, but you also want to generate a lot of value for your customers and also the people you build with. And so, it's that's the trajectory that we hope we're on.
Absolutely.
And,
Yeah, and I think it should be. Awesome. Well, we're gonna open up. We have a few minutes of Sean's valuable time. So if you guys have really smart, well thought out, well-researched questions, we're gonna start with gentleman here.
What are you working on now?
So what am I working on now? So I still spend about, I would say, 20-ish% of my time at Circle, but trying to wind it down just to be bored. It's a crazy busy board. So but hopefully that diminishes a little bit. And then I split my time between two other things. One is I do some investing, and then I started what was a venture studio, which has now turned into an initiative on one particular project, which we've talked a little bit about publicly. It's really at the nexus of both AI workflows and stablecoins. And so we've talked a little bit about, we've worked a lot in AI over the last couple years, and really in an AI in a way that has nothing to do with crypto or stables. And in working in that mode, we got conviction around the web going agent native effectively in this new era that is coming upon us. And there is a lot of hype and I think overinflated expectations, particularly in the near term around it, and yet it's still real. Like both things are true. And so we found really firsthand that when our agentic workflows were using money, it was very difficult to make them reliable and trustworthy if they were not using stable coins. And we could make them demonstrably more reliable if they were using stables, starting with USDC, but we used Tether as well and others. And so that ultimately led to conviction around like saying, hey, let's create a new kind of financial institution or bank from the ground up, just start over from scratch. New bank core designed for agents to be using it. Let's build our compliance workflows just with agents at the outset, not as just tools for people to use, but with agents doing everything from the ground up. And so we're effectively building a new kind of AI bank on this AI, underlying AI infrastructure, which we're also contributing to. Love to see standards emerge around it, and just spending a lot of, that's why we're here, talking to people at Simon's conference and trying to get people together to agree on approaches to these things. But our commercial offering we've been a little quieter about, but it's the regulated financial institution we're building on those fundamentals, and it's going really well, but agents can't get licensed yet. They can't get a bank charter and so on, and so we still go through the traditional path, and then our agents use our licensing, and so we're navigating that path right now. And it's interesting because building a company now, particularly one that's focused on being kind of like AI native and using agents, it's like you don't construct a company in the same way. Like Circle is like 1,100 people now, or I don't know, whatever it is. But there's probably 100 risk analysts that are like humans who open their laptops and go into their dashboards to police for like open cases and police for AML. And we do all of those things, but we do them all with AI agents. There's no human that needs to do that, and we can demonstrate that it's incredibly reliable to use AI. And it's not true it's not true in the same way for every workflow, but it's true in a lot of them. And so you just don't need as many people, and the people that you do need, they're doing something slightly different than they would be doing at a bank or an FI, because they're doing a little bit of managing the workflow and overseeing the agents. So that's what we're working on, and actually that's how we got connected.
We're a customer to be.
Yeah, it's given us great feedback, and
it's a lot of fun.
So that's what we're working on. And initially, the reason I decided to start as a venture studio is the USDC team was tiny. It's just basically 4 people. It ended up being about 6 people who built it. Just, like I said, couldn't get any resources for it. So I took some of them and created a company that I thought we would just incubate our own stuff over and over again. It turns out this is the one idea that we actually really care about. And so we just decided to do this.
That's awesome. Anissa?
So I love that you shared the pre-success story, kind of the pivot hell story. And pivot hell is the reality of so many of us founders. And I think a big part that I wanted to understand was you guys just kept going, you had the tenacity to keep going. But there is this aspect, at least with Y Combinator, when you think through this idea of like, when is it time to just stop and put a deadline and say, okay, let's just start over, clean cap table, no burden from before, fresh idea, and when is it time to keep going through pivot hell? And I don't know if it was just a matter of you guys just trying a new or other way, but if you had to advise yourself, if you look back now, what were the factors if you're talking to a founder who you'd advise them like keep going through pivot hell, and when is it time to say, okay, shut down, start something new, and just unburden your cap?
Yeah, first, it's a good question. It's a really hard question to answer because I think each case is kind of different. Company that we did before this was a video company. And so, that company, the answer is very different than what we did at Circle. Because that company was really more like, let's figure out what's actually going to work. And what ended up working was a white label video platform for publishers. It was not really clear at the time. So there was also a consumer effort, that was kind of like a YouTube or something. So there was a lot of stuff that was tried. And then those were shut down pretty quickly when they weren't gaining traction. With Circle, it was more like, we are deliberately, we're going to try multiple things at once. And we raised the capital to do it. And so we knew that we were going to start with like 3 things. So we continued to do that, and when one would be wound down, we'd still spin up another. So we never narrowed it. So the common advice is like, don't do too much and just do one thing, and we just never did that from the outset. So Circle was a little bit different, but I do think, I have like maybe one regret, but mostly don't really have any regrets about how we did Circle, but you'd probably think I should have more. But I do think we should have realized that Bitcoin and Ethereum were not going to work for payment rails sooner. It shouldn't have taken us that long. And so some of it is, you see what you want to see, and it's hard to separate seeing what you want to see from just conviction as a founder that this is what the world is going to be, but it's not yet. And the world is going to be money running on internet rails, but it was not going to be Bitcoin. And so it's like those are the things that made us take too long to realize we needed to work with putting dollars and euros and pesos and other fiat, but putting that kind of fiat money on internet rails. And so this is not much of an answer, but it's trying to separate conviction as a founder, which is just you believe in this thing, you're going to make it work. If forced, you'll be the last one to turn the lights off, but you're not quitting. You just have to be resilient. Everybody else is allowed to, but you can't quit. And so keeping that conviction in mind and just continue to go while still being clear-eyed about the realities of what's happening around you. And then also say, I just never really loved the word pivot because a pivot to me, there's course corrections where you have the same vision in mind or the same market that you're targeting, but you change the product that you're using to go after it. And then there's going after a completely different market or a different customer altogether. That to me is a pivot. And so we never really did, so people talk about all the pivots we made at Circle. We never really did that because we still always went after the people who were going to have money running on internet rails. And we took kind of a broad view of what the target was. But if we had decided we were going to go in a completely different direction and not do anything in crypto or not do anything, we were going to have a financial institution, but we were going to be Chime, or we were going to do Square and try to take over, I don't know, I can't even think of a good example, and I'm not criticizing those companies. That would have been a pivot. And so, we never really did that, but we definitely did major course corrections where we shut down products to explore new ones. And the best advice I guess I can give is, if you believe it, if you have conviction about what you're doing, then continue to have conviction, but stay clear-eyed about the realities of what you might need to do to accomplish it. It's kind of like the metaphor of, the mountain in the distance that you're marching toward. You may need to take a different course to get there, or even backtrack and try again. But if you decide you actually don't want to climb that mountain at all, you want to go climb another one, that's a big pivot.
I think someone else had, Jonathan, go ahead.
So, where stablecoins are going. Right now, it's USD dominated. Do you believe that it still sort of maintains dominance? Do you believe that actually more fiat currencies or all fiat currencies come into play? Like, where is that heading? And
Yeah.
also, does Bitcoin fall into that, or is it really
So those are both great questions. And so I would say there's a time element. So if you look in the relative near term, not pinning it into like months or years or whatever, in the relative near term, mostly when people say stablecoins, they mean dollars. And a lot of the immediate use cases that are not crypto capital market use cases, we find, especially in our new venture, people don't even want stablecoins, they want dollars. They want dollars on their phone or dollars in their account. It just so happens that stables are a good implementation for it. But they're not asking for Tether or USDC, they're asking for dollars. And so I'd say in the near term, it's very much dominated by dollars. And then after that time period, I think we'll see multiple kinds of fiat currencies and real FX markets that execute on blockchain rails. But I think it might take some time in order to get there. But the FX markets are so inefficient. It is a use case that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, so I think in the near term it's dollar dominated, but I'm not a believer that stablecoins are just dollar stablecoins. I think we'll see multiple currencies that will be active. I think we'll see new kinds of currencies invented even, so I don't think it'll be entirely dollar, but it is right now. And then where Bitcoin fits in, so my take on Bitcoin is that it is great as an asset, and it actually doesn't need a lot of product innovation. And the Bitcoin team folks hate it when I say things like that. But there have been a lot of experience. Obviously, there's Lightning, and there's lots of experiments with various forms of state channels. I just don't think that it is as useful as programmable money as alternatives that we already have, like in Solana and Ethereum in the L2 world, but also in the new emerging L1s that are coming out. You look at things like the dedicated payment chains like Tempo or Arc or others, where they're specifically designed just for payment channels. You're not competing, for block space with like meme coins or whatever. Fees are denominated in stable coins, not in a token. Sub 300 millisecond final settlement globally. All of these things, you sort of add them up, embedded AMMs for effects between stables. If there are chains that do that, then those are the chains that are going to be used for payments, and it's not going to have anything to do with Bitcoin. That's not to say Bitcoin is not worth investing in or whatever. It's a great as an asset, and its use case to me is it's achieved true escape velocity as an asset, and digital gold and all of those sorts of things, but not as programmable money.
I think we have one more question. There.
So I think we're living in a more progressive or permissive administration now for fintech, stablecoins, virtual currency. So that might suggest that the regulators will come correct in the next administration. But on the other hand, it seems like industry is doing a better job than it's ever done before with looking after compliance and trying to fit things into the right frameworks. Do you see another correction, or do you think we're getting closer to mainstreaming and moving beyond that?
Yeah, it's a good question too around policy. If you didn't hear the questions, would there be a correction, say, post this administration? So I think, regardless of what people may think about this administration, I'm trying to be purple and all of that. It has been fantastic for this particular industry, and just the clarity around how the U.S. government views things like stablecoins, even aside from the policy specifics, like even if you disagree with the treatment of reserves or the customer protections or what you can do with interest income, it's at least clarity. It's at least saying that this is how the government views it right now. It's not implemented. I mean, OCC hasn't implemented it yet, but it is like way better. And that coupled also with the very low risk of enforcement action right now and for experiments, make this a great time to be innovating. So, and then there's also, I think, the acceleration of things like everybody's going for a national trust bank charter now because it's accelerated their goals with the current OCC. So, the pendulum always swings, but it shouldn't swing in a way that unwrites law or revokes charters, because it just hasn't really, there's not really a lot of precedent for that, but it may swing in the sense that things will be slowed down, or enforcement action may be picked up again in the future. So it's not, in my view, and this is not my area of expertise, it's just my opinion, it won't be a lot of things being undone, but it may be a different climate. And when that different climate comes, I'm very optimistic that it won't be as onerous as what we had under, the Warren, Biden, Gensler triumvirate, which was terrible, not just for crypto, but for all innovation. It was very anti-innovation. And, although people have done things that are positive in other ways in their careers, all of their careers they've been anti-innovation. And so the new version, even if it is, say it's another party that comes in, I have to be optimistic that it won't be the same kind of aversion to technical innovation that we've seen over the last few years. So, not a politician.
Awesome. So yeah, any parting advice for fellow founders who a lot of us are go through ebbs and flows, and in that dark moment, it's more inevitable, right? Like it happens to all of us. Like any kind of a parting advice?
Yeah, I think one thing is a lot of things are coming together right now. That This is why I'm excited about doing another company, because a lot of things are finally coming together and converging in a way that it's an accelerant. Like agentic commerce really is an accelerant for stablecoin adoption. I don't think you can do agentic commerce without stablecoins. We also have regulatory clarity in the U.S., which will be mimicked throughout the world. So all of these things are finally coming together. It's just a great time to be building, in this space. And then so I think the one thing is just like if you're kind of paralyzed by trying to decide what to do or what to build or what product to launch or test or whatever, just do something. Like just move it forward and then change, correct afterward. But you have to keep moving, like keep putting one foot in front of the other. And the other thing I would say is like right now, especially, there's just a ton of every day there's 3 announcements with a bunch of logos on that look like, and you can't manage a company or a product with like FOMO. And so it's just like, pay attention to what's going on, but don't get too low or too high. Oh, this competitor just came out of the woodwork and they have this funding with these partners, or just go build your thing, And so try to stay steady, and then if you can stay steady when things are really starting to come together like now, it actually makes it easier to not get too low when things are not going so well. So just try to stay in that band, keep a relatively high baseline, but don't, try to keep yourself normalized as best you can. It's a series of marathons, it's not sprints. And so those are some things that I think of. And then the last thing I think of is I have a hard time getting motivated to do small businesses that aim for get your first $1 million ARR and then double it and then triple it and then you end up with a company that is a $30 million company. Like, who cares? Like, why would you, if that's your goal to make that kind of money, go work for Google or something.
It's just as hard, right? It's just as difficult.
It's just as hard, and you're a much surer path to make that kind of money if that's what you're going for. If you want to do something generational and something that really changes and generates a meaningful value, that's what you should be doing, and not really just optimizing for. This is what I need to do in the next 3 months to get these, this whatever. There's a path, obviously, and you gotta look along the roadmap, but it's basically, I guess, that comes down to don't be afraid to do something really fucking big. Like, swing for the fences,
Amen. What a way to close, man. Big round of applause.